I'm Ava, 32 female. I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood in a house I inherited from my grandmother, a place that always felt like a sanctuary. I'm a senior project manager, a job that suits my personality perfectly. I like order, plans, and seeing things through to completion. My life was, I thought, comfortably predictable. The story I'm about to tell you is about how that predictability was shattered by the very people I was supposed to trust the most, and how I took back control. It's a story about a lost passport, a $15,000 vacation, and a betrayal so cold it forced me to change all the locks, on my house and on my heart. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The trip was my mother's idea, of course. For her 56th birthday, Georgia wanted nothing more than a grand family vacation to an all-inclusive luxury resort in the Maldives. It was the kind of trip you see on postcards, with overwater bungalows, crystal-clear turquoise water, and white sand beaches that seemed to stretch into infinity. The price tag was astronomical, $15,000 for the four of us for 10 days. My father, Mark, had recently retired and was watching his pension, so the cost was a significant point of contention. But my mother was relentless. She painted a beautiful picture of family bonding, of making memories that would last a lifetime, conveniently ignoring the fact that most of our recent family gatherings had ended in strained silence or a full-blown argument. I was the one who footed the majority of the bill. As a senior project manager at a successful tech firm, I had a comfortable salary and had been saving diligently for a down payment on a second property. My mother knew this, and her guilt trips were legendary. "Oh, Ava, it would mean the world to me," she'd say, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "After all the sacrifices we made for you girls." It was a line she used often, a well-worn tool to get what she wanted. My sister, Diana, a 24-year-old aspiring social media influencer, was ecstatic. For her, this wasn't a family trip. It was a content creation opportunity. She talked endlessly about the photo ops, the designer swimwear she was going to buy, and how the aesthetic of the Maldives would elevate her brand. I agreed to pay for it, telling myself it was a generous gift for my mother's birthday. Deep down, I think I was just trying to buy a little peace. The tension within our family had been simmering for years, a low-grade fever that never quite broke. My parents had always favored Diana. She was the bubbly, outgoing one, the one who could do no wrong. I was the serious, responsible one, the one who was expected to be mature, to be the grown-up, even when I was a child. I paid for Diana's first car, co-signed her apartment lease, and quietly transferred her money every few months when her influencing career failed to pay the bills. My parents saw this not as generosity, but as my duty. "You're the successful one, Ava," my father would say. "It's only right that you help your sister." So I booked the flights, the resort, the excursions. I handled every detail, creating spreadsheets and itineraries to ensure everything went smoothly. The trip was scheduled for the first week of June, and the excitement in our family group chat was palpable, at least from my mother and Diana. They sent endless messages with links to resort wear and screenshots of idyllic beaches. I tried to share in their enthusiasm, but a knot of anxiety was tightening in my stomach. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not just funding this vacation, but also serving as its designated manager, responsible for everyone's happiness. 2 days before we were scheduled to leave, the illusion began to crack. We were all supposed to meet at my parents' house for a final packing check and to go over the travel documents. I had everything organized in a neat folder: flight confirmations, resort booking details, and copies of our passports. The original passports were safely tucked away in my travel wallet, which I kept in the front pocket of my carry-on bag. I arrived at my parents' house feeling a sense of weary accomplishment. The planning was done. All that was left was to get on the plane. "Ava, honey, you look tired," my mother said as she opened the door, giving me a perfunctory air kiss. "You've been working too hard." "Just want to make sure everything's perfect for your birthday, Mom," I replied, forcing a smile. Diana was lounging on the sofa, scrolling through her phone, a look of boredom on her face. Is everything ready? I need to make sure I have enough time to schedule my posts for while we're gone. I ignored her and opened my folder on the dining room table. Okay, everyone, let's just double-check our passports. Make sure they're valid and in good condition. My parents produced theirs without issue. Diana pulled hers from a designer handbag. I reached into my carry-on, my fingers searching for the familiar feel of my travel wallet. It wasn't there. A flicker of panic went through me. I emptied the front pocket. Nothing. I unzipped the main compartment and started pulling out packing cubes and my laptop. Still nothing. What's wrong? My father asked, his brow furrowed with concern. I can't find my passport, I said, my voice barely a whisper. The room went silent. I could feel 3 pairs of eyes on me as I frantically tore my bag apart. My heart was pounding in my chest. I am meticulously organized. I do not lose things, especially not something as important as a passport. Well, where did you last see it? My mother asked, her tone shifting from concern to annoyance. It was in my travel wallet, right here in my bag. I saw it this morning when I did a final check, I insisted, my mind racing. I retraced my steps. I had driven straight from my house to theirs. The bag had been on the passenger seat next to me. I hadn't stopped anywhere. It had to be here. For the next hour, we searched. We turned my car inside out, checked every corner of my parents' living room, and I even drove the 10 minutes back to my house to conduct a frantic, top-to-bottom search. The passport was gone. It had vanished into thin air. The panic was now a cold, heavy stone in my stomach. The flight was in less than 48 hours. There was no way to get a new passport in time. I wouldn't be able to go on the trip. The $15,000 trip that I had paid for. As the reality of the situation sank in, I looked at my family, expecting to see disappointment, sympathy, maybe even a shared sense of loss. What I saw instead chilled me to the bone. My father was pacing the room, muttering about the money. Diana was back on her phone, a smirk playing on her lips, and my mother had an expression of pure, unadulterated indifference. It was in that moment that the first crack in the facade of our perfect family began to show. The missing passport was just the beginning. The real betrayal was yet to come. The air in my parents' living room grew thick with a tense, suffocating silence. The frantic energy of the search had dissipated, replaced by a cold, heavy resignation. My passport was gone. There was no magic solution, no last-minute miracle that was going to change the fact that in 36 hours, my family would be boarding a plane to paradise, and I would be left behind. I sank onto the sofa, the reality of the situation washing over me in waves of disbelief and despair. My mind was a whirlwind of questions. How could this happen? Where could it be? I am the person who color codes spreadsheets for fun. I live by checklists and reminders. Losing my passport 2 days before a major international trip was so fundamentally out of character that it felt like a violation of my very identity. I looked to my family, my voice small and strained. What are we going to do? It was a plea, a request for solidarity. I expected them to say, "We'll figure something out," or "We're not going without you." I expected the family unit, the one my mother so desperately wanted to celebrate with this grand vacation, to rally around me. My father was the first to speak, his voice gruff and pragmatic. Well, there's nothing we can do, is there? You can't fly without a passport. The trip is non-refundable. We can't just throw away $15,000. He wasn't looking at me as he spoke, but at the wall as if he were discussing a minor inconvenience like a delayed flight or a bit of bad weather. The words stung, not because they weren't true, but because of the complete lack of emotion behind them. It was a business transaction, a cost-benefit analysis. My presence on the trip was a line item that had just been deleted. Then my mother, Georgia, delivered the blow that would shatter the last of my illusions. She sighed, a long, theatrical sound of exasperation, and sat down in the armchair opposite me. She didn't offer a hug or a word of comfort. She just looked at me with an expression that was shockingly cold, almost clinical. "Ava, let's be realistic," she began, her voice smooth and even. "It's a shame you're so disorganized, but we can't let your mistake ruin this for everyone. We've been looking forward to this for months." The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. "My mistake," I repeated, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and hurt. "Mom, I didn't lose it. It was in my bag, I know it was." She waved a dismissive hand. "Honestly, Ava, we don't care," she said, and the cruelty of those words hit me with the force of a physical slap. "This trip will actually be better without you. It will be more relaxed. You won't be hovering over everyone with your schedules and your plans. We can just enjoy ourselves for once." The room spun. I stared at her, trying to recall. Ensile, the woman who had claimed this trip, was about family bonding with the one sitting before me, calmly stating that my absence would be an improvement. It was as if a mask had been ripped away, revealing a stranger with my mother's face. The years of feeling like an outsider, the nagging sense that I was valued for what I could provide rather than who I was, all crystallized in that one horrific moment. They didn't want me there. They wanted my money, my planning, my organizational skills to make their dream a reality, but they didn't actually want me. Diana, who had been silently observing this exchange with an unnerving level of detachment, finally chimed in. "She's right, Ava," she said, not even bothering to look up from her phone. "You're always so stressed out. You would have just brought the mood down. At least now we can have some fun." I felt the air leave my lungs. I was being uninvited from my own party, the one I had paid for. I looked from my mother's cold indifference to my sister's casual cruelty to my father's stony silence. There was no support here, no empathy, just three people who were mildly inconvenienced by my crisis, but ultimately relieved that they would be able to enjoy their free vacation without the person who had made it possible. The perfect family getaway was a lie. The grand illusion had shattered, and the truth was ugly and sharp. They were going to the Maldives without me, and they were happy about it. I stood up, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. I needed to get out of that house, away from their suffocating presence. I grabbed my purse and my now useless carry-on bag, my hands shaking. "I have to go," I managed to choke out. No one tried to stop me. My mother simply nodded, as if my departure was just another item on her pre-vacation to-do list. "All right, dear. Try to find that passport, will you? It will be a hassle to replace." As I walked out the door and into the cool evening air, the finality of it all washed over me. This wasn't just about a missed vacation. It was about the complete and utter collapse of what I thought my family was. The disappearance of my passport had triggered the disappearance of their masks, and the truth that lay beneath was something I wasn't sure I could ever recover from. I drove home in a daze, the streetlights blurring through my tears. I felt a profound sense of loneliness, a feeling of being utterly and completely adrift. Little did I know, the worst was yet to come. The final, irrefutable proof of their betrayal was just a text message away. The drive home was a blur of tears and numb disbelief. I unlocked the door to my empty house, the silence inside a stark contrast to the storm raging in my mind. The house, my sanctuary, felt different now. It felt like the only safe place in a world that had suddenly turned hostile. I dropped my bags by the door and collapsed onto the couch, replaying the scene at my parents' house over and over. My mother's words, "Honestly, we don't care. This trip will actually be better without you," echoed in my head, each repetition a fresh stab of pain. For hours, I just sat there, wrapped in a blanket, as the shock slowly gave way to a deep, gnawing sorrow. I mourned the loss of the vacation, yes, but more than that, I mourned the loss of the family I thought I had. I had spent my entire adult life trying to earn their love and approval, believing that if I was responsible enough, successful enough, generous enough, they would finally see me. I had shouldered their burdens, solved their problems, and funded their dreams, all in the hope of securing my place in the family. Now I saw the truth. My place was that of a resource, a tool to be used and then discarded when I was no longer needed. I must have fallen into a restless, dream-haunted sleep at some point because I was startled awake by the buzz of my phone on the coffee table. The screen glowed in the darkroom. It was nearly 2 a.m. A message from Diana. My heart lurched. For a fleeting, foolish moment, I thought it might be an apology, a change of heart. Maybe they had come to their senses, realized how cruel they had been, and decided to cancel the trip. I unlocked the phone, my thumb hovering over the notification. The message was a photo. My breath caught in my throat. It was a picture of my passport, sitting on a pristine, white duvet cover. The background was unmistakably a hotel room, plush, modern, and expensive. It was a room at an airport hotel near the international terminal. They hadn't even waited until they reached the Maldives to start their vacation without me. Beneath the photo was a short, flippant message that sealed their betrayal in a way that nothing else could have. "Oops, I hid it, my bad." I stared at the screen, the words blurring as a new wave of emotion washed over me, so powerful it eclipsed the sorrow. It was rage. A cold, clear, all-consuming rage. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. My own sister had stolen my passport, had watched me tear my life apart looking for it, had listened to our mother verbally eviscerate me, and had said nothing. She had orchestrated the entire thing. She had done it to get me out of the way, to ensure she and my parents could enjoy the luxurious vacation I had paid for, all to themselves. The oops was a taunt. The my bad was a final, dismissive flick of the wrist, a testament to how little I meant to her, to any of them. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. The part of me that had always sought their approval, that had always made excuses for their behavior, that had always put their happiness before my own, it died. It was replaced by something new, something hard and unyielding. The grief was still there, but it was now overlaid with a steely resolve. They had pushed me too far. They had underestimated me. They thought I would just roll over and accept their cruelty, that I would sit at home, heartbroken, while they sipped cocktails on a beach. They were wrong. I took a screenshot of the photo and the message, a piece of evidence in a trial that would be held not in a court of law, but in the court of my own life. Then, with a strange sense of calm, I typed out a one-word reply. "Good." I hit send. Let her wonder what that meant. Let her think I was admitting defeat. It didn't matter what she thought. All that mattered was what I was going to do next. The hurt was still there, a deep, aching wound. But for the first time, it wasn't paralyzing me. It was fueling me. They wanted to go on a trip without me? Fine. They wanted to enjoy the fruits of my labor while stabbing me in the back? Fine. But they were going to come back to a world that was very, very different from the one they had left. The plan began to form in my mind, not as a detailed schematic, but as a single, powerful idea. The house I lived in, the one my grandmother had left solely to me, had been a point of contention for years. My parents believed it should have been shared, that it was family property. They still had keys. They came and went as they pleased, often without asking, helping themselves to things, criticizing my decor, treating my sanctuary as an extension of their own home. That was about to end. I was going to secure the house. I was going to change the locks. I was going to build a fortress, not of bricks and mortar, but of boundaries. They had severed the family ties. I was just going to formalize the separation. The rage was a fire in my veins, and it was burning away the fog of a lifetime of manipulation and emotional abuse. I was finally seeing clearly. And what I saw was a path forward, a path that I would walk alone, but a path that was entirely my own. The single word "good" hung in the digital space between my sister and me, a cryptic and final statement. I didn't wait for a reply. I switched my phone to silent and set it aside. The rage that had ignited within me was not a fleeting, hot-headed burst of anger. It was a slow-burning, clarifying fire. It burned away the confusion, the self-doubt, and the years of conditioned responses that had kept me tethered to a toxic family dynamic. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to their cruelty. I was thinking, planning, and seeing the long game. The passport incident was not an isolated event. It was the culmination of a lifetime of slights, manipulations, and betrayals. As I sat in the quiet stillness of my living room, the memories came flooding back, not as disjointed anecdotes, but as a coherent narrative of exploitation. It was a pattern, and I had been blind to it for 32 years. I thought of the time in college when my parents had convinced me to take out a larger student loan than I needed. with the promise of helping me pay it back, only to use the extra money to fund Diana's study abroad trip to Paris, which had been little more than a 3-month shopping spree. The loan and the debt had remained solely in my name. I remembered the down payment for my first car, a sensible used sedan. I had saved for it for 2 years, working part-time jobs all through high school. A week before I was set to buy it, my father sat me down for a serious talk about family responsibility. Diana's 16th birthday was coming up, and she had her heart set on a brand new convertible. It wouldn't be fair, he argued, for me to have a car and for her to have nothing. Pressured and guilt-tripped, I had handed over my savings, and Diana had gotten her convertible. I took the bus to my university classes for another year. The lies were not just financial, they were emotional. My successes were minimized, treated as expected outcomes. "Of course you got the promotion, Ava," my mother would say. "You've always been the career-oriented one." It wasn't a compliment, it was a label, a box to keep me in. Meanwhile, Diana's minor achievements were celebrated with lavish dinners and fawning praise. Her every whim was catered to, her every mistake excused. She was the creative one, the free spirit, which was their code for irresponsible and unaccountable. I had been their safety net, their financial planner, their emotional support system, and their scapegoat. I was the stable foundation upon which they built Diana's unstable life, and I was expected to do it all with a smile, grateful for the opportunity to serve my family. Any attempt to establish boundaries was met with accusations of being selfish, ungrateful, or difficult. "Why are you making this so complicated, Ava?" was a frequent refrain from my mother, whenever I questioned a request for money or time. The trip to the Maldives was the most audacious and expensive example of this pattern. I had paid for everything, planned everything, and in their minds, my role was complete. My physical presence was not only unnecessary, but, as my mother had so cruelly stated, undesirable. They had what they wanted from me. Diana's theft of my passport was simply the final, logistical step in cutting me out of the picture. She had done it, I realized with a sickening certainty, with our parents' full knowledge and approval. The feigned surprise, the performative search, it had all been a lie, a carefully orchestrated piece of theater designed to make me feel responsible for my own exclusion. This realization was devastating, but it was also liberating. The guilt that had been my constant companion for years evaporated. The sense of obligation, the heavy weight of their expectations, it was gone. I owed them nothing. In fact, they owed me. I thought about the thousands of dollars I had poured into their lives, the opportunities I had sacrificed, the emotional energy I had expended trying to win an unwinnable game. The debt was all on their side. My mind, accustomed to managing complex projects, shifted into its natural state, problem-solving. My family was a project that had failed, a system riddled with corruption and inefficiency. It was time to decommission it. My objective was clear: protect my assets, establish ironclad boundaries, and extricate myself from their lives completely. The house was the first and most critical step. It was my biggest asset, my only true sanctuary, and they had keys. They felt entitled to it. That had to change immediately. I picked up my phone, my fingers moving with a newfound purpose. I didn't text my friends for emotional support, not yet. That would come later. Right now, I needed action. I opened my browser and typed in 24-hour emergency locksmith. I found one with good reviews that serviced my area. Then, I sent a text message to my friend Kyle, the lawyer. "Kyle, are you awake? I have a legal situation I need to discuss. It's about my family and my house." He responded almost immediately. "Awake now, what's going on?" I gave him the brief, unvarnished version of events. The trip, the passport, the text from Diana. His reply was swift and unequivocal. "Change the locks, Ava, today, and gather every piece of financial documentation you have related to money you've given them. We'll talk in the morning. I'll clear my schedule." His validation was a balm to my raw nerves. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't being dramatic. I was being smart. The history of lies had unraveled, and now, armed with the truth, I was finally ready to act. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a pale, gray light into my living room. It felt like the dawn of a new era. The old Ava, the one who tried to please everyone, was gone. The new Ava, the one who was about to secure her house and her future, was just getting started. The locksmith arrived at 8 a.m. sharp, a cheerful man with a toolbox that seemed to contain every possible solution to a security problem. As he worked, drilling out the old locks on my front door, back door, and the side door to the garage, the sound was jarring, but also deeply satisfying. Each screech of the drill was the sound of a boundary being fortified, a connection being severed. I was methodically and physically removing my family's access to my life. While the locksmith worked, I was on the phone with Kyle. His voice, usually calm and measured, had a hard edge of anger on my behalf. They did what? Ava, this is beyond a family squabble. This is theft and fraud. I know, I said, my own voice steady. But I don't want to press charges, Kyle. I just want them out of my life. I want to make sure they have no claim on me or this house ever again. Okay, he said, shifting into professional mode. Let's be strategic. First, the house. Your grandmother left it to you in her will, correct? Solely to you. Yes, it's all in my name. The deed, the mortgage I paid off last year, everything. Good, that's ironclad, he said, a note of relief in his voice. The fact that they had keys and treated it like a communal space is irrelevant from a legal standpoint. It's your property. Changing the locks is the first and most important step. When they get back, they will have no legal right to enter without your permission. We talked for over an hour, outlining a plan. Kyle advised me to go through my financial records, bank statements, credit card bills, old emails, and text messages, and create a comprehensive ledger of every significant financial contribution I had made to my family over the past decade. The student loan for Diana, the down payment for her car, the countless times I had paid her rent or covered her credit card bills. Even the $15,000 for the Maldives vacation. This isn't for a lawsuit, necessarily, Kyle explained. It's for leverage. It's an invoice. When they come back and inevitably cause a scene, demanding to know why they've been locked out, you're going to present them with a bill for services rendered. It will be a clear, undeniable statement that the Bank of Ava is closed, permanently. The idea was brilliant. It was a language my parents, especially my accountant father, would understand. It transformed the situation from a messy, emotional confrontation into a transactional one. They had treated me like an ATM for years. It was time to show them the final, itemized receipt. After the locksmith finished and I paid him, I held the new keys in my hand. They felt solid, real. I made a copy for my friend Jennifer, my closest confidant, and dropped it off with her, giving her a tearful, condensed version of the story. Her hug was fierce and protective. "I'm so sorry, Ava," she whispered. "But I'm also so proud of you. It's about time you put yourself first." The rest of the day was spent on a painful but necessary archaeological dig through my past. I unearthed old bank statements from dusty file boxes, searched through years of emails, and scrolled back through text conversations with my parents and Diana. It was a meticulous and emotionally draining process. Each transaction, each request for money, was a small paper cut, a reminder of a time I had chosen to ignore my own needs in favor of theirs. The student loan payment confirmation. The wire transfer to the car dealership. The endless stream of Venmo payments to Diana labeled rent, groceries, help. As I compiled the numbers, the total grew to a staggering amount. It was well over $100,000. Seeing it all laid out in a single spreadsheet was sickening. It was a decade of my hard work, my savings, my sacrifices, all siphoned away to fund their lifestyle and enable my sister's perpetual adolescence. And what had I gotten in return? Betrayal. A stolen passport and the cold, hard truth that my presence was considered a burden. The final item I added to the ledger was the $15,000 for the Maldives trip. I labeled it, "Family Vacation, Services Not Rendered." By the time I finished, it was late in the evening. I had a 10-page document, complete with dates, amounts, and descriptions. I saved it as a PDF titled Final Invoice. I felt exhausted, but also strangely light. The process of quantifying their exploitation had been cathartic. It had turned my pain into data, my heartbreak into a balance sheet. I knew the confrontation when they returned would be difficult. There would be yelling, crying, and accusations. They would try to gaslight me to make me feel guilty and cruel. But this time, I was prepared. I had my new locks, my lawyer on speed dial, and $100,000 invoice. The foundation of our family had been built on a series of lies and unwritten, one-sided contracts. I was about to present them with a new contract, one with very clear terms and conditions. And the first term was that they were no longer welcome in my home or in my life. The locks were changed. The books were balanced. Now, all I had to do was wait for them to come home. The 10 days my family was away were the quietest and most productive of my life. The initial storm of anger and grief subsided, leaving behind a calm, clear sense of purpose. I worked from home, finding comfort in the familiar routines of my job. I reconnected with friends I had neglected, including Jennifer and Kyle, who formed a small, fiercely protective circle around me. I went for long walks, cooked healthy meals, and rediscovered the simple joy of living in my own space, on my own terms, without the constant, low-level anxiety of waiting for the next parental pop-in or a call from Diana asking for money. I used the time to further secure my life. On Kyle's advice, I contacted my mobile phone provider and added extra security layers to my account to prevent any attempts at a SIM swap or other malicious actions. I changed all my important passwords and made sure my parents and sister were removed from any shared accounts we might have had, like streaming services or online shopping profiles. It was a digital detox, a systematic untangling of my life from theirs. Each action felt like another lock clicking into place. The day they were due to return, a nervous energy buzzed beneath my calm exterior. I had rehearsed the conversation in my head 100 times. I had the final invoice printed out and sitting in a manila envelope on my coffee table. Kyle had offered to be there, but I had declined. This was something I needed to do myself. It wasn't about a legal battle. It was about me, standing on my own 2 feet, speaking my own truth. Their flight was scheduled to land in the afternoon, so I expected them to arrive at my house by early evening, assuming they would come straight here, as they often did, to drop off a few things and recount their trip. At 6 p.m., my security camera sent a notification to my phone. A taxi had pulled up to the curb. My heart began to pound. This was it. I watched on my phone as my parents and Diana got out of the cab, looking tanned and relaxed, laden with luggage and shopping bags. They walked up the driveway, chattering and laughing, completely oblivious. My mother, holding a souvenir tote bag, walked confidently up to the front door and inserted her key into the lock. I watched the screen as she tried to turn it. Nothing happened. She frowned, jiggled the key, and tried again. The look of confusion on her face slowly morphed into one of annoyance. She banged on the door. "Ava, are you in there? The key isn't working." I took a deep breath, walked to the door, and looked through the peephole. The 3 of them stood on my porch, their sun-kissed glow fading into expressions of irritation. I opened the door, but kept the security chain engaged. "The key isn't supposed to work, Mom," I said, my voice even and calm. Her face contorted with anger. "What is the meaning of this? Why did you change the locks?" "This is my house," I replied simply. "I have the right to decide who has access to it." "Don't be ridiculous, Ava. We're your family. Now, open this door. We need to use the bathroom and drop our things," she commanded, as if I were a disobedient child. Behind her, Diana scoffed. "Oh my God, are you seriously still mad about the passport thing? It was a joke. Get over it." That was the final confirmation I needed. The casual dismissal of her cruelty, the complete lack of remorse. I looked past them, at my father, who remained silent, his face a mask of disapproval, as if my behavior was a social embarrassment. "It wasn't a joke, Diana," I said, my voice dropping, cold and sharp. "It was a betrayal. And this," I said, gesturing to the locked door between us, "is the consequence." I unlatched the chain, opened the door just enough to slide the manila envelope through the gap, and then immediately shut and relocked it. "I believe this is for you," I said through the door. I heard my mother rip open the envelope. There was a moment of confused silence, then a choked gasp. "What is this? $112,000. Are you insane?" she shrieked, her voice high-pitched with outrage. "It's not a request for payment," I said, speaking loudly so they could hear me through the solid wood. "It's a record of it. It's a statement of services rendered and funds provided. It's the price of this vacation and every other time you've treated me like a bank instead of a daughter. Consider that my final contribution to the family. We're even." "You ungrateful child," my father boomed, finding his voice at last. "After everything we've done for you." "What have you done for me?" I shot back, the question sharp and genuine. "You raised me to be your safety net. You taught me that my worth was tied to my utility. Well, this utility is no longer in service." The yelling and banging on the door continued for another 10 minutes. They called me selfish, crazy, ungrateful. They threatened, they pleaded, they tried to manipulate. But the door held firm, a physical representation of the new boundaries I had set. I walked away from the door and sat on my couch, my hands trembling slightly, but my heart resolute. Finally, the noise subsided. I checked my security camera again. They were standing on the lawn, defeated, surrounded by their luggage. My mother was on her phone, likely calling a taxi. Diana was crying, her influencer-perfect facade crumbling into a mask of petulant rage. They looked like what they were: 3 people who had expected a soft place to land and had instead run into a brick wall. As the second taxi pulled away, taking them out of my life, a profound sense of peace settled over me. It wasn't a triumphant, fist-pumping victory. It was a quiet, solemn, and deeply personal win. I had stood up for myself. I had protected my home and my heart. The welcome mat was gone. The open-door policy was over. The unwelcome return had ended, and my new life had just begun. In the weeks and months that followed the confrontation at my front door, the silence from my family was deafening and deeply welcome. The initial aftermath was a flurry of angry text messages and voicemails, cycling through the predictable stages of narcissistic rage: disbelief, threats, feigned remorse, and finally, attempts to rally other family members to their cause. They tried to paint me as unstable, as cruel and vindictive, but the narrative didn't stick. Most of our extended family already knew the dynamic, had witnessed the favoritism and exploitation for years. Some reached out with quiet messages of support, saying they were not surprised and that it was about time. I never responded to any of their messages. With Kyle's help, I had a formal cease and desist letter sent to them, stating that any further contact would be considered harassment. That, finally, stopped the calls and texts. The quiet that followed was not an empty silence. It was a space I could finally fill with my own life, my own thoughts, my own peace. The biggest change was internal. The heavy weight of obligation I had carried for so long was gone. I felt lighter, freer. I no longer made decisions based on how my family might react or what they might need. I started making decisions for myself. I took a solo trip to Italy, something I had always dreamed of but had always put off because the money was needed elsewhere or the timing wasn't right for them. I walked through Rome, ate pasta in Florence, and hiked the cliffs of Cinque Terre, and with every step, I felt like I was reclaiming my own life. I redecorated my house, erasing the last of my mother's suggestions, and turning it into a space that was truly mine. I painted the walls in colors that I loved, bought art from local artists, and created a home office that was a haven of productivity and calm. My house was no longer just a piece of property to be defended. It was a reflection of the person I was becoming. My friendships deepened. Jennifer and Kyle became my new family, a family of choice, built on mutual respect, trust, and genuine affection. We had regular dinners, went on weekend trips, and supported each other through life's ups and downs. I learned what it felt like to be loved for who I am, not for what I can provide. About 6 months after the incident, I received a letter from a law firm representing my parents. They were attempting to contest my grandmother's will, claiming she was not of sound mind when she left the house solely to me. They argued that it was always intended to be family property and that they were entitled to a share. Kyle laughed when I showed him the letter. "It's a Hail Mary," he said. "A desperate cash grab. They have no case and they know it." He was right. The challenge went nowhere. My grandmother's will was clear and legally sound. Their attempt to rewrite history failed, just as their attempts to control me had failed. It was their final, pathetic grasp for the life I had financed for them, and it slipped through their fingers. The final invoice, as I came to call it, was never paid, of course. I never expected it to be. Its purpose was not to recoup the money, but to serve as a declaration of independence. It was a line-item accounting of my own self-worth, a final closing of the books on a toxic relationship. The real payment was the peace I had found, the freedom I had gained. That was worth more than any amount of money. I heard through the grapevine that Diana's influencing career never took off. Without my financial backing, she had to get a real job, working in retail. My parents had to sell their house and downsize to a small apartment, unable to maintain their lifestyle without my contributions. I felt a brief, fleeting pang of something, not pity, but a sad acknowledgement of their short-sightedness. They had traded a daughter for a single, 10-day vacation. They had prioritized a fleeting luxury over a lifetime of love and support. It was a bad deal, and now they were living with the consequences. My story doesn't end with a dramatic, tearful reconciliation. It ends with quiet, steady, and joyful growth. It ends with me, happy and whole, in a life of my own making. I learned the hardest lesson of all, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away. Sometimes, the only way to build a new beginning is to issue a final invoice and close the account for good.